The dust settled around Katherine Abbott's boots as she stepped out of the general store in Sacramento, California, her arms laden with supplies, only to find the three Hartley sisters blocking her path like a wall of pastel fabric and false smiles. It was June 1879, and the afternoon sun beat down mercilessly on the wooden sidewalks, but the heat radiating from those women's judgment felt far more scorching than any California summer could manage. "Well, well," Evelyn Hartley said, her voice dripping with honey-coated venom. "If it isn't our dear Katherine, still shopping for one instead of a family." Margaret, the middle sister, adjusted her parasol with exaggerated delicacy. "I was just telling Evelyn how peculiar it is that you turned down Thomas Mitchell last month. That makes what, the 7th proposal you have refused? Or have we lost count?" The youngest, Caroline, giggled behind her gloved hand. "Mama says you will end up alone with nothing but your father's ranch and your pride to keep you warm at night. What a tragic fate for a woman of 24. Katherine felt the familiar tightness in her chest, the one that came from swallowing words she desperately wanted to say. She had heard variations of this conversation more times than she could count, from these women and dozens of others who seemed personally offended by her unmarried status. The fact that she had inherited her father's cattle ranch after his death 2 years ago only seemed to make matters worse. A woman running a ranch alone was scandalous enough, but a woman who kept refusing perfectly adequate marriage proposals was apparently an insult to nature itself. "Excuse me, ladies," Katherine said, keeping her voice level as she tried to step around them. "I have a long ride back to the ranch." "Of course you do," Evelyn said, not moving an inch. "Always running back to that ranch, working like a man, acting like you do not need anyone." "It is unnatural, Katherine. Women are meant to marry, to have children, to make a home, but I suppose you think you are better than all that." "I suppose she thinks she is too good for any man in Sacramento," Margaret added, "though I cannot imagine what she is waiting for. She is not getting any younger, and her looks will not last forever." Katherine felt her face flush, not with embarrassment but with anger. She had built her father's struggling ranch into one of the most profitable spreads in the Sacramento Valley through backbreaking work and smart decisions. She had survived drought, cattle thieves, and the constant judgment of a town that could not understand why a woman would choose independence over a loveless marriage. She had refused those 7 proposals not because she thought herself too good, but because not one of those men had seen her as anything more than a ranch to acquire or a woman to control. "My looks and my future are my own concern," Katherine said, her voice sharper now. "Now if you will please move aside." "Desperate," Caroline said, shaking her head with mock sadness. "That is what you will be in a few more years, desperate and alone, begging for any man to take pity on you. That is enough." The voice came from behind Katherine, deep and steady with an edge of steel that made all 4 women turn. Katherine found herself looking up at a man she had never seen before, tall and broad-shouldered, with dark hair that curled slightly at the collar of his dusty shirt. His face was weathered from sun and wind, with strong features and eyes the color of storm clouds. He wore the practical clothes of a working cowboy, his hat pushed back slightly on his head, and he carried himself with a quiet confidence that immediately shifted the energy of the entire encounter. "Excuse me," Evelyn said, drawing herself up indignantly. "This is a private conversation, sir." "No, madam, it is not," the stranger said, his voice remaining calm but firm. "It is 3 women publicly insulting another woman on a public sidewalk, and I have heard just about enough of it." Margaret's eyes narrowed. "I do not believe we know you, sir. This is a matter between neighbors." "Then be better neighbors," he said simply. He turned to Katherine, and something in his expression softened. "Miss, do you need help with those supplies?" Katherine found herself momentarily speechless, caught off guard by the unexpected intervention. "I can manage, thank you." "I am sure you can," he said, and there was no condescension in his tone, just simple acknowledgement. But managing alone and accepting help when it is offered are not mutually exclusive. He looked back at the Hartley sisters, and his expression hardened again. "Ladies, I believe you were just leaving." For a moment, Katherine thought Evelyn might argue, but something in the stranger's demeanor made even that formidable woman think twice. With a chorus of indignant huffs and whispered comments about rude strangers, the three sisters swept away down the sidewalk, their parasols bobbing like disgruntled birds. Katherine released a breath she had not realized she was holding. "Thank you, though that was not necessary." "I have dealt with worse than the Hartley sisters." "I do not doubt it," the stranger said. He reached for the heavy sack of flour in her arms. "But just because you can fight every battle alone does not mean you should have to. I am Bennett Frost, newly hired foreman at the Morrison Ranch." "And you are Katherine Abbott," she said, allowing him to take the flour. "I run the Abbott Ranch about 5 miles east of town." "I have heard of it," Bennett said, falling into step beside her as they walked toward where her wagon waited. "Good reputation. People in town say you have turned it into something impressive." "People in town say a lot of things about me," Katherine replied, unable to keep the bitterness from her voice. "Most of them considerably less complimentary than that." Bennett was quiet for a moment as he loaded the flour into her wagon. When he spoke again, his voice was thoughtful. "I could not help but overhear what those women were saying, about you not marrying." Katherine stiffened, preparing for another judgment, another piece of unsolicited advice about her life choices. "And I suppose you have opinions about that as well." "I do," Bennett said, and Katherine braced herself. He turned to look at her directly, his gray eyes serious. "I think that makes you wise, not desperate like them." Katherine nearly dropped the bag of cornmeal she was holding. "What?" "Those women," Bennett continued, helping her load the rest of her supplies. "They married because it was expected, because they were afraid not to, because they thought their worth depended on having a husband. That is desperation. Waiting for something real, refusing to settle for less than you deserve, having the courage to stand alone rather than compromise who you are. That is wisdom." For the first time in longer than she could remember, Katherine felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes. She blinked them back furiously, unused to this kind of understanding from a stranger, from anyone really. "You do not even know me." "No," Bennett agreed. "But I know what it is like to be judged for not following the path everyone else thinks you should take. And I know the difference between someone who is afraid and someone who is brave." He secured the last of her supplies and stepped back. "For what it is worth, Miss Abbott, I think you are doing just fine." Katherine studied him for a long moment, this unexpected defender with his storm cloud eyes and his easy confidence. There was something genuine about him, something that made her want to know more. "Where are you from, Mr. Frost?" "Montana Territory, most recently," he said. "Before that, all over. I have been working cattle ranches since I was 16, moving where the work took me. Decided it was time to settle somewhere for a while, and California seemed as good a place as any. And the Morrison Ranch hired me sight unseen based on a letter of recommendation from my last employer," Bennett said. "I start officially next week, but I rode into town today to get the lay of the land." He smiled slightly. "I did not expect to get involved in sidewalk disputes on my first day." Despite everything, Katherine found herself smiling back. "Welcome to Sacramento, Mr. Frost. I hope you find it less judgmental than I have." "Something tells me the problem is not Sacramento," Bennett said. just small-minded people who exist everywhere. He tipped his hat to her. "It was a pleasure meeting you, Miss Abbott. I hope I will see you around." "I am sure you will," Katherine said, climbing up onto her wagon seat. "It is not that big a town." As she drove away, she found herself glancing back once to see Bennett Frost still standing there, watching her go with an expression she could not quite read. Something had shifted in that brief encounter, some small crack in the armor she had built around herself over years of judgment and criticism. For the first time in a long time, someone had seen her choices not as failures but as strength. The ride back to her ranch took her through rolling hills golden with summer grass, past sprawling oak trees that provided blessed patches of shade. She had made this journey countless times, but today it felt different somehow. She kept replaying Bennett's words in her mind. "That makes you wise, not desperate like them." Such simple words, but they had struck something deep inside her, some part of herself she had protected and defended for so long without ever really believing she was right to do so. The Abbott Ranch spread out before her as she crested the final hill. 300 acres of good grazing land with a modest house, a sturdy barn, and corrals that she had rebuilt herself after a storm had damaged them the previous spring. It was not the biggest spread in the valley, but it was hers, built through her own sweat and determination. Her father had left her with a struggling operation and more debt than cattle. She had spent 2 years turning that around, working harder than any man she knew, making smart trades, breeding better stock, and refusing to be intimidated by those who thought a woman had no business running a ranch. Her foreman, an older Mexican man named Jorge who had worked for her father and stayed on to work for her, was waiting by the barn when she pulled up. "How was town, Miss Katherine?" "The usual," she said, climbing down from the wagon. The Hartley sisters felt the need to remind me of my spinster status. Jorge shook his head as he began unloading supplies. "Those women have too much time and too little sense. You pay them no mind." "I try not to," Katherine said, though today there was someone who actually defended me. A new foreman at the Morrison place, Bennett Frost. "Morrison finally hired someone," Jorge said with interest. "About time. That ranch has been running on bare bones since his old foreman retired. What is this new man like?" Katherine considered the question as she carried a sack of beans toward the house. "Different," she finally said. "He seems like someone who thinks for himself rather than just accepting what everyone else believes." Jorge gave her a knowing look. "That is high praise coming from you." "It is just an observation," Katherine said, but she could feel her cheeks warming. "I spoke with him for all of 5 minutes. Long enough to make an impression, apparently," Jorge said with a small smile. "When was the last time you mentioned a man at all, let alone spoke of him with interest?" "I am not speaking of him with interest," Katherine protested. "I am simply noting that he was kind when he did not have to be. That is worth acknowledging." "If you say so, Miss Katherine," Jorge said, but his smile suggested he did not believe her protests for a moment. Over the next few days, Katherine found herself thinking about Bennett Frost more than she wanted to admit. She told herself it was simply because his words had been so unexpected, so different from what she usually heard. But she knew it was more than that. There had been something in the way he looked at her, a recognition, an understanding that she rarely encountered. He had seen her not as an oddity or a woman to be pitied, but as someone making her own choices for her own good reasons. She threw herself into her work, as she always did when her mind needed distraction. There were fences to mend, cattle to check, endless tasks that kept a ranch running. But even as she worked, she found herself wondering if she would see Bennett Frost again, and what she would say to him if she did. The answer came sooner than she expected. It was a Wednesday morning, and Katherine was working with a young horse in one of the corrals, patiently teaching it to accept a saddle. She had always been good with horses, had a natural patience and understanding that her father had recognized and encouraged. The young mare was skittish but learning, and Katherine was so focused on her work that she did not notice the rider approaching until Jorge called out, "Miss Katherine, you have a visitor." She looked up to see Bennett Frost dismounting from a handsome bay gelding, his hat in his hands as he approached the corral. Her heart did an unexpected skip in her chest, and she silently cursed herself for the reaction. "Mr. Frost," she said, keeping her voice steady as she secured the mare and climbed out of the corral. "What brings you out this way?" "I was hoping to speak with you," Bennett said. "If you have a moment, I promise not to take up too much of your time." Katherine wiped her dusty hands on her trousers, aware that she probably looked a mess with her hair escaping its braid and dirt smudged across her face. "Of course. Would you like to come up to the house? I can offer you some water or coffee." "Water would be appreciated," Bennett said. "It is hot enough to fry eggs on the rocks today." They walked up to the house together, and Katherine was acutely aware of his presence beside her, the easy way he moved, the quiet confidence he carried. She poured them both water from the pump, grateful for the cool liquid after hours in the sun. "Your ranch is impressive," Bennett said, looking around at the well-maintained buildings and healthy cattle grazing in the distance. "You have clearly put a lot of work into this place." "Thank you," Katherine said. "It has not been easy, but it has been worth it. This ranch is everything to me." Bennett nodded slowly. "I can see that. It is in every detail, every choice. This is not just a business to you, it is a calling." "Most people think I am crazy," Katherine admitted. "A woman working a ranch alone, refusing to marry and let a husband take over. They think I am stubborn and foolish." "Most people are idiots," Bennett said bluntly, and Katherine found herself laughing despite herself. "That may be true, but they are persistent idiots," she said. "So what did you want to speak with me about, Mr. Frost?" Bennett set down his water glass and looked at her directly. "I wanted to apologize if I overstepped the other day. I know you did not ask for my help with those women, and I do not want you to think I assumed you could not handle yourself. You clearly can." Katherine was surprised by the apology. "You did not overstep. Or if you did, it was in a way I appreciated. Those women have been hounding me for years, and it was satisfying to have someone tell them to stop." "Good," Bennett said, relief evident in his expression. "I also wanted to ask if you might need an extra hand around here from time to time. I have been at the Morrison place for a few days now, and while the work is steady, it is not as demanding as I was led to believe. I find I have time on my hands, and I would rather spend it working than sitting idle." "I cannot afford to hire another hand," Katherine said carefully. "Jorge and I manage, but the margins are tight." "I am not asking for pay," Bennett said. "I am asking if you would accept help when it is offered. You said the other day that managing alone and accepting help are not mutually exclusive. I believe that, and I would like to help if you will let me." Katherine studied him, trying to understand his motivation. "Why would you want to work for free?" Bennett was quiet for a moment, considering his answer. "Because I admire what you are doing here. Because I think you deserve support, not judgment. And because I would like to know you better, Katherine Abbott, and I figure working alongside someone is the best way to do that." The honesty in his words took her breath away. No games, no pretense, just straightforward truth. It was so rare, so unexpected, that she found herself agreeing before she had fully thought it through. "I could use help repairing the roof on the barn," she heard herself say. "It has been leaking in the corner, and it is not a one-person job." Bennett's face lit up with a genuine smile that transformed his serious features into something warm and open. "I can be here Saturday morning if that works for you." Saturday morning, Katherine agreed, and found herself smiling back. True to his word, Bennett arrived at dawn on Saturday with a wagon full of tools and materials. Katherine had expected him to be punctual, but she had not expected him to bring supplies as well. "I picked up some extra shingles in town," he explained at her questioning look. "Morrison owed me for some work I did before I officially started, and I figured this was as good a use for the money as any." They worked together throughout the morning, and Katherine was surprised by how comfortable it felt. Bennett did not try to take over or tell her how things should be done. Instead, he asked questions, listened to her answers, and worked beside her as an equal. He was skilled with his hands, efficient and careful, and they fell into an easy rhythm that made the work go quickly. "You are good at this," Katherine observed as they took a break in the shade, sharing water and the sandwiches she had packed. "I have been working ranches for 12 years, Bennett said. "You pick things up, but you are good at this too, better than most men I have worked with." "My father taught me everything," Katherine said. "He never had a son, and he refused to treat me like I was fragile just because I was a girl. He taught me to ride, to rope, to fix things and make things and run a ranch. When he died, I promised myself I would keep this place going, that I would honor everything he taught me." "He would be proud of you," Bennett said quietly. "Any father would be." They finished the roof repair by early afternoon, and Katherine insisted Bennett stay for dinner. Over steaks and potatoes, they talked about their lives, their experiences, their dreams. Bennett told her about growing up in Missouri, about losing his own parents young and making his way through various ranches across the West. Katherine told him about the struggles of the past 2 years, about the small victories and the constant challenges of proving herself in a world that did not want to accept her. "You ever get tired of fighting?" Bennett asked. "Of constantly having to prove yourself?" "Every single day," Katherine admitted. "But what is the alternative? Give up? Marry someone who wants to take over my ranch and turn me into a decorative wife? I would rather fight." "I understand that," Bennett said. "I have spent my whole life being told I should settle down, buy my own place, stop wandering. But the truth is, I never found anywhere that felt like settling down for. Until now, maybe." Their eyes met across the table, and Katherine felt something shift between them, a deepening of the connection that had been building since that first day in Sacramento. It scared her, this feeling, because she had spent so long protecting herself, convincing herself that she was better off alone. But Bennett Frost was making her question that conviction, making her wonder if maybe, just maybe, there was another way. Over the following weeks, Bennett became a regular presence at the Abbott Ranch. He would ride over after finishing his work at the Morrison place, spending evenings helping with whatever needed doing. Sometimes it was heavy labor like moving cattle or repairing fences. Other times it was simpler things, sitting on the porch in the evening discussing ranch business or the state of the world, sharing meals and conversation that ranged from practical to philosophical. Katherine found herself looking forward to his visits with an anticipation that both thrilled and terrified her. She had been alone for so long, had convinced herself that she preferred it that way. But Bennett was showing her what she had been missing. Not someone to take care of her or take over her life, but someone to share it with, to work beside, to laugh with and talk to and simply be with. Jorge noticed the change in her and approved wholeheartedly. "It is good to see you smile like that, Miss Katherine," he said one evening after Bennett had left. "That man is good for you." "We are just friends," Katherine protested, though the words felt hollow even as she said them. "If you say so," Jorge replied with the same knowing smile he had given her before. "But friends do not look at each other the way you two do." The truth of his words hit her one evening in late July. They had been moving a small herd to new grazing land, hot and exhausting work under the relentless summer sun. As they drove the last of the cattle through the gate, Catherine's horse stumbled in a gopher hole. She was a skilled enough rider that she stayed in the saddle, but the sudden jarring movement sent a shooting pain through her ankle. Bennett was off his horse and beside her in seconds, his hands reaching up to help her dismount. "Are you hurt?" "My ankle," Katherine admitted, trying not to wince as she put weight on it. "I think I twisted it." Without asking permission, Bennett scooped her up in his arms and carried her to a nearby shade tree, settling her down gently on the grass. "Let me see." Katherine wanted to protest that she could take care of herself, but the concern in his eyes stopped her. She let him remove her boot and examine her ankle, his touch gentle and careful. "It is swelling," he said. "You need to stay off it for a few days, keep it elevated and wrapped." "I do not have time to stay off it," Katherine said. "There is too much work to do." Bennett looked up at her, his gray eyes serious. "Katherine, you are not going to do anyone any good if you make this worse. Let yourself heal. Let me and Jorge handle things for a few days." "I cannot ask you to do that." "You are not asking," Bennett said firmly. "I am telling you. You are stubborn and strong and capable, and I admire all of that about you. But even the strongest people need to rest sometimes. Please, let me help you." There was something in his voice, in the way he was looking at her, that made Katherine realize this was about more than just her ankle. This was about trust, about letting someone in, about accepting that needing help was not the same as being weak. "Okay," she said softly. "Okay." Bennett's whole face softened with relief. He helped her back onto her horse, then mounted his own and rode beside her all the way back to the ranch house, one hand steadying her in the saddle. Once there, he carried her inside despite her protests, settling her on the sofa with her foot propped up on pillows. "I am going to wrap this," he said, and she watched as he carefully bound her ankle with strips of cloth, his movements sure and competent. When he finished, he looked up at her and she found she could not look away. "Thank you," she said, "for everything. Not just this, but all of it. You have been kinder to me than I knew how to accept." "Katherine," Bennett said, and there was something raw in his voice. "I need to tell you something, and I am just going to say it straight, because that is the only way I know how. I am falling in love with you. Maybe I have been since the first day I saw you standing up to those women in town. You are the strongest, bravest, most remarkable woman I have ever met, and being near you makes me want to be better than I am." Katherine's heart was pounding so hard she thought it might break through her ribs. "Bennett, I have spent so long convincing myself that I was better off alone. That needing someone was weakness, that love would mean losing myself. And now," Bennett asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Now I am terrified," Katherine admitted, "because I am falling in love with you too, and I do not know how to do this. I do not know how to let someone in without losing everything I have fought for." Bennett reached up and gently cupped her face in his hands. "You do not have to lose anything. I do not want to take over your ranch or your life. I want to share it. I want to be your partner, your equal. I want to stand beside you, not in front of you or behind you. I want to build something together, if you will let me." "I want that too," Katherine whispered. And then Bennett was kissing her, soft and gentle at first, then deeper as she wrapped her arms around his neck and kissed him back with all the feeling she had been holding inside for weeks. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Bennett rested his forehead against hers. "I love you, Katherine Abbott, and I promise I will spend every day proving that you can trust me with your heart." "I love you too, Bennett Frost," Katherine said, and saying the words out loud felt like breaking through a barrier she had built around herself for years. "And I am going to try my hardest to believe that." Over the following weeks, as Katherine's ankle healed, their relationship deepened. Bennett was true to his word, never trying to take over or make decisions for her, always consulting her, always treating her as an equal partner. He split his time between the Morrison Ranch and Catherine's place, and it began to feel natural, like he had always been part of her life. But Sacramento was a small town, and it did not take long for people to notice. Katherine was in town buying supplies in August when she ran into the Hartley sisters again, this time with their mother in tow. "Katherine Abbott," Mrs. Hartley said, her voice full of false sweetness. "I hear you have been keeping company with that new cowboy, Bennett Frost." "I have," Katherine said evenly, refusing to be baited. "How desperate you must have been," Evelyn said with a smirk. "To settle for a drifter with no property, no prospects, nothing to offer." "He has everything to offer," Katherine said, her voice sharp. "He is kind and honest and treats me with respect. That is more than I can say for any of the men I have refused." "Respect," Margaret laughed. "What good is respect when you are both poor? He works for someone else, Katherine." "He does not even own his own ranch." "Neither did my father when he started," Katherine shot back. "He worked his way up, and so will Bennett. The difference is Bennett sees me as a partner, not property to acquire." "Mark my words," Mrs. Hartley said coldly. "That man will tire of playing at being your equal, and then he will either try to take over your ranch or leave you for someone more amenable. Men do not want strong women, Katherine. They want wives who know their place." Katherine looked at the four women, seeing them clearly for what they were. Not happy wives in fulfilling marriages, but women who had settled for less than they deserved and resented anyone who refused to do the same. "I feel sorry for you," Katherine said quietly. "All of you. You married because you were afraid not to, and now you spend your time tearing down other women to make yourselves feel better about your choices. That is truly sad." She walked away before they could respond, her head held high. She had wasted too many years caring what people like the Hartleys thought. She was not going to waste any more. That evening, she told Bennett about the encounter. They were sitting on her porch watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink, his arm around her shoulders, her head resting against his chest. "They said you would either try to take over my ranch or leave me," she said. "That you were just playing at being my equal." She felt Bennett tense beneath her. "And what do you think?" Katherine lifted her head to look at him. "I think they are wrong. I think you are the most genuine person I have ever met. But I also think we need to talk about the future, about what we want and how we see this working." Bennett nodded slowly. "You are right. We do need to talk about that." He took a deep breath. "I have been thinking about it a lot, actually. I have some money saved up, not a lot, but enough to buy some breeding stock if I could find the right opportunity. I was wondering if maybe we could become actual partners. I could invest in your ranch, help build it up, and we could share the ownership and the work equally." "You want to invest in my ranch," Katherine said carefully, "not take it over." "I want us to build something together," Bennett said. "Your ranch is already successful because of your work, your vision. I would be lucky to be part of that. I am not interested in taking over anything, Katherine. I am interested in partnership, in every sense of the word." Katherine felt something tight in her chest start to loosen. "That sounds like exactly what I want too." "Good," Bennett said, pulling her close again. "Because I also want to marry you, Katherine Abbott. Not because I think you need a husband or because I want to own your ranch, but because I love you and I want to spend my life with you. As your partner, your equal, your husband if you will have me." Katherine pulled back to look at him, seeing the love and sincerity in his eyes, the way he was offering her everything she had ever wanted without asking her to give up anything in return. "Yes," she said, tears streaming down her face. "Yes, I will marry you." Bennett kissed her then, deep and long and full of promise, and Katherine felt like she was finally, completely home. They were married in September, a small ceremony with Jorge and a few of Bennett's friends from the Morrison Ranch as witnesses. Katherine wore a simple blue dress, and Bennett wore his best shirt and a nervous smile. The local minister performed the ceremony in the parlor of Katherine's house, which would now be their house, and when he pronounced them husband and wife, Bennett kissed her like she was the most precious thing in the world. The following months were the happiest of Katherine's life. Bennett bought a small herd of quality breeding stock with his savings, and they worked together to integrate them into the ranch's existing cattle. He moved his few belongings into her house, and they settled into a rhythm of shared labor and shared dreams. True to his word, Bennett never tried to take over. They made decisions together, planned together, worked side by side from dawn to dusk, building something that belonged to both of them. He respected her knowledge and experience, and she valued his input and different perspective. It was a true partnership, the kind Katherine had never believed possible. In town, reactions were mixed. Some people, like the Hartley sisters, continued to look down on them, calling Bennett a kept man and Katherine unnatural. But others, seeing the success of their partnership and the obvious love between them, began to reconsider their assumptions. Younger women in particular started asking Katherine's advice, wondering if maybe there was another way to live than the path they had always been told to follow. "You are becoming an inspiration," Bennett told her one evening as they discussed an invitation to speak at the local women's literary society. "Whether you meant to or not." "I just lived my life," Katherine said. "I refused to settle for less than I deserved." "That is exactly why you are an inspiration," Bennett replied, kissing her forehead. "You showed people what is possible." As winter set in, bringing cooler temperatures and occasional rain to the Sacramento Valley, Katherine realized her monthly courses had not come. She waited another week to be sure, then another, before finally sharing her suspicion with Bennett. "I think I might be pregnant," she said one morning over breakfast, watching his face carefully for his reaction. Bennett's whole face lit up with joy. "Truly, Katherine, that is wonderful." His enthusiasm dispelled any lingering worries she might have had. "I thought you might be concerned. A baby will change everything." "It will change some things," Bennett agreed, coming around the table to kneel beside her chair and take her hands in his. "But not the important things. Not us, not our partnership, not our love. We will figure it out together the same way we figure everything else out." Katherine leaned down and kissed him, grateful beyond words for this man who saw challenges as opportunities and never tried to make her smaller to make himself feel bigger. The pregnancy progressed smoothly through the winter and into spring. Katherine continued working as long as she could, and Bennett became fiercely protective without being controlling, always making sure she was not overexerting herself while respecting her need to stay involved. In late April of 1880, their son was born. They named him Thomas William after both their fathers, and he came into the world screaming with robust lungs and a full head of dark hair. Katherine held him for the first time and felt her heart expand in ways she had not known were possible. "He is perfect," Bennett whispered, sitting beside her on the bed and looking at their son with wonder. "He is ours," Katherine said softly, "and he is going to grow up seeing what a real partnership looks like. He will know that men and women can be equals, that love does not mean one person diminishing themselves for another." "He is lucky to have you as a mother," Bennett said, kissing her temple. "We both are. Life with a baby was exhausting and wonderful in equal measure." Thomas was a demanding infant, but between Katherine, Bennett, and Jorge's wife Rosa, who came to help, they managed. The ranch continued to thrive, and they hired 2 additional hands to help with the workload so Katherine and Bennett could spend more time with their son. On Thomas's first birthday, they threw a party at the ranch. Friends and neighbors came from all over, including, to Katherine's surprise, some of the women who had once judged her harshest. The Hartley sisters notably stayed away, but their younger cousin Emma came, pulling Katherine aside during the festivities. "I wanted to thank you," Emma said quietly. "You probably do not remember, but I was there the day Bennett defended you against my cousins in town. I have never forgotten what he said, about you being wise rather than desperate. It made me reconsider my own engagement to a man I did not love. I broke it off, and my family was furious, but I do not regret it. I would rather be alone and true to myself than married and miserable." "I am glad," Katherine said, squeezing the younger woman's hand. "You deserve to be happy, whatever that looks like for you." "Thank you," Emma said, "for showing me that there is another way." That evening, after all the guests had left and Thomas was asleep, Katherine and Bennett sat on their porch watching the stars come out. The spring air was cool and sweet, carrying the scent of wild flowers from the hills. "You ever regret it?" Katherine asked. "Marrying me instead of finding some easier path?" Bennett turned to look at her, his expression incredulous. "Easier, Katherine, I do not want easier. I want real. I want partnership and challenge and building something meaningful together. I want you exactly as you are. I have never regretted a single moment. Not even when I was so sick during pregnancy that I could not keep anything down for 3 months. Not even then," Bennett said firmly. "Sickness passes. What we have does not. Not even when I insisted on working until the day before Thomas was born, and you were so worried you turned gray." "I was worried," Bennett admitted. "But I also knew better than to try to stop you. And you were fine. You knew what you were doing. You always do." Katherine leaned against him, content in a way she had never imagined possible. "I love you, Bennett Frost. Thank you for seeing me when no one else did." "I love you too," Bennett replied. "Thank you for taking a chance on a drifter cowboy who was just passing through." As the years passed, their ranch continued to grow and prosper. They added more land, improved their stock, and built a reputation for quality cattle and fair dealing. Thomas grew into a bright, curious boy who learned to ride almost before he could walk and showed signs of inheriting both his mother's determination and his father's steady patience. When Thomas was 3, Katherine became pregnant again. This time she knew what to expect, and while the pregnancy was no easier physically, emotionally she felt more prepared. Their daughter was born in the fall of 1883, a tiny thing with Katherine's green eyes and Bennett's dark hair. They named her Sarah Mee, and from the moment she arrived, she had her father wrapped around her little finger. 2 children, Katherine marveled one evening, watching Bennett walk the floor with Sarah while Thomas played with wooden blocks at her feet. "I never imagined this life for myself." "Neither did I," Bennett admitted. "I thought I would always be alone, always moving from place to place. But then I met a stubborn woman who refused to settle, and everything changed." "I was not stubborn," Katherine protested. "I was principled." "You were both," Bennett said with a grin. "You still are, and I love you for it." Life was not always easy. There were droughts and market downturns, sick cattle and difficult seasons. But they faced everything together, drawing strength from each other and their partnership. The ranch that had once been Katherine's alone became truly theirs, a testament to what was possible when 2 people worked together as equals. In 1885, Jorge retired, and they hired Emma Hartley's younger brother as their new foreman. Emma herself had married a schoolteacher from San Francisco and moved away, but she wrote regularly, always thanking Katherine for showing her that happiness mattered more than propriety. The Hartley sisters, meanwhile, had not fared as well. Evelyn's husband left her for a younger woman. Margaret's went bankrupt and moved the family to Oregon, and Caroline's turned to drink and became violent. Katherine tried not to take satisfaction in their misfortunes, but she could not help noting the irony. The women who had been so sure that marriage was everything had found that the wrong marriages were worse than nothing. On their 10th wedding anniversary in 1889, Bennett took Katherine on a rare trip away from the ranch, leaving the children with Rosa and her husband. They rode up into the Sierra Nevada foothills, camping under the stars and swimming in cold mountain streams. It was like being newlyweds again, free and young and full of possibility. "You remember that first day in Sacramento?" Katherine asked as they lay wrapped in blankets by their campfire, the stars brilliant overhead. "When you told those women I was wise rather than desperate, I remember," Bennett said. "I meant every word." "I did not believe you then," Katherine admitted. "I wanted to, but I had been told the opposite for so long that I could not quite accept it. But you were right. Waiting for you, refusing to settle, that was the wisest decision I ever made." "We saved each other," Bennett said softly. "You showed me what home could be, and I showed you that you did not have to be alone to be free." "We built something neither of us could have built alone," Katherine agreed. "Something worth fighting for." "Something worth everything," Bennett said, and kissed her under the endless stars. They returned home to find Thomas had taught Sarah to say her first word, which was unfortunately no, much to everyone's amusement. Life settled back into its comfortable rhythm of work and family. The daily tasks of running a successful ranch interspersed with the joys and challenges of raising children. As the 1890s began, Katherine looked at her life with deep satisfaction. She was 40 years old, mother of 2 extraordinary children, equal partner in a thriving ranch, and married to a man who loved and respected her completely. The woman who had been mocked for never marrying, who had been called desperate and foolish and unnatural, had built exactly the life she wanted on her own terms. In town, younger women now pointed to her as proof that there were other paths, other possibilities. The tide was slowly turning, though there were still plenty of people who disapproved. Katherine did not care. She had stopped caring what small-minded people thought years ago. One afternoon in the spring of 1892, now with Thomas approaching 12 and Sarah 8, Katherine and Bennett were working together to break a new horse when a familiar wagon rolled up their drive. To Katherine's shock, it was Mrs. Hartley, now considerably older and looking rather worn. "Mrs. Hartley," Katherine said cautiously, walking over to meet the wagon. "What brings you out here?" The older woman climbed down slowly, her movements stiff with age and what looked like arthritis. "I came to apologize," she said bluntly, "and to ask your advice." Katherine exchanged a surprised look with Bennett, who had come to stand beside her. "I am listening." Mrs. Hartley took a deep breath. "My daughters are all miserable. Their marriages have failed or brought them nothing but heartache. And my granddaughter, Evelyn's daughter, is asking questions I do not know how to answer. She wants to know why she has to marry, why she cannot live like you do. And I realized I owe you an apology for all the terrible things I said, for all the judgment I passed." Katherine was quiet for a long moment, processing this unexpected turn. "What changed your mind?" "Seeing you," Mrs. Hartley said simply. "Seeing you happy and successful and building something real. Seeing my daughters trapped in miserable marriages while you thrived. I was wrong, Katherine. About all of it, and I am sorry." "Thank you," Katherine said carefully. "I appreciate you saying that. As for your granddaughter, tell her that she should never settle for less than a partnership built on mutual respect and love. Tell her that being alone is better than being with someone who wants to diminish her. Tell her that the right person, if he exists, will want to stand beside her, not above her." Mrs. Hartley nodded slowly. "Like your husband does." "Like my husband does," Katherine agreed, reaching for Bennett's hand. He squeezed her fingers, a silent support. "You were brave," Mrs. Hartley said, "and we called you foolish for it. That is our shame to bear, not yours." She climbed back into her wagon. "Thank you for your kindness, Katherine. You had every right to turn me away." As the wagon rolled away, Bennett pulled Katherine into his arms. That must have been satisfying. "It was not about satisfaction," Katherine said, though she was smiling. "It was about hope. If Mrs. Hartley can change her mind, maybe others can too. Maybe Sarah will grow up in a world with more possibilities than I had." "She will," Bennett promised, "because she has you as a mother and will know that she can be anything she wants to be." The years continued to unfold in a tapestry of joy and challenge, triumph and struggle, all of it woven together with love. Thomas grew into a young man who shared his parents' passion for ranching, while Sarah surprised them all by developing a fascination with veterinary medicine, learning everything she could about animal health and healing. In 1898, when Katherine was 48 and Bennett 46, they celebrated their 20th wedding anniversary with a large party at the ranch. It seemed like half of Sacramento showed up, including many of the young women Katherine had inspired over the years, now building their own unconventional lives. Emma came all the way from San Francisco with her husband and 3 children. "You changed my life," she told Katherine. "I wanted to make sure you knew that." "You changed your own life," Katherine replied. "I just showed you it was possible." As the sun set on the celebration, Katherine stood with Bennett on their porch, watching their guests mill about the yard, their grown children laughing with friends, their grandchildren playing tag around the oak trees. "We did it," she said softly. "We built exactly what we said we would. A life of partnership and respect and love." "We did," Bennett agreed, his arm around her waist, "and I would not change a single moment of it. Not even the hard times, the droughts and the losses and the struggles, not even those," Bennett said firmly. "Because we faced them together, and that made all the difference. You and me, Katherine, partners in everything." "Partners in everything," Katherine echoed, and kissed him as the sun painted the sky in shades of gold and amber. As twilight deepened into night, and their guests eventually departed, Katherine and Bennett remained on their porch, 2 people who had found each other against the odds and built something that would last beyond their lifetimes. The ranch would continue through their children. The lessons they had taught would ripple out through all the lives they had touched, and the love they shared would stand as proof that there was another way, a better way, for those brave enough to seek it. In the distance, a coyote called to the rising moon, and somewhere in the barn a horse whinnied softly. The ranch settled into its nighttime rhythms, secure and prosperous and full of promise. Katherine leaned against Bennett's shoulder, feeling the steady beat of his heart, the warmth of his presence, the absolute rightness of their partnership. She thought back to that day in Sacramento, when 3 judgmental women had mocked her for refusing to marry, for choosing independence over desperation. She thought about the cowboy who had stepped forward and said the words that would change her life. "That makes you wise, not desperate like them." He had seen her truth when no one else would, and in seeing it, he had given her the courage to believe it herself. "I love you," she whispered into the gathering darkness. "I love you too," Bennett replied. "Today, tomorrow, and all the days after, you and me, Katherine, always." And in that moment, under the vast California sky with the ranch they had built together stretching out around them, Katherine Abbott Frost knew with absolute certainty that she had made the right choice all those years ago. She had waited for real love, for true partnership, for a man who would stand beside her rather than in front of her. She had refused to settle, and in refusing, she had found everything she had ever truly wanted. The Wild West was changing, becoming more civilized with each passing year. But here on their ranch, Katherine and Bennett had carved out their own kind of freedom, one built on equality and respect and abiding love. They had proven that marriage did not have to mean submission, that partnership could be genuine, that two people could build something together without one diminishing the other. As stars began to emerge overhead, brilliant points of light in the darkening sky, Katherine felt a profound sense of peace settle over her. This was her life, the one she had fought for and built and defended. This was her home, her family, her legacy. And it was exactly what she had always hoped it could be, though she had barely dared to dream it was possible. Bennett stood and extended his hand to her. "Come to bed, my love. Tomorrow will bring new challenges, and we will face them together." Katherine took his hand and let him pull her to her feet, following him into the house they had made a home. Through the windows, she could see Thomas reading by lamplight in his room, Sarah already asleep with a veterinary textbook on her bedside table. Their children, growing into people who would make their own choices, forge their own paths, confident in the knowledge that they could be anything they wanted to be. In their bedroom, Bennett helped her with the buttons on her dress, his touch still sending shivers through her even after 20 years of marriage. They lay down together in the bed they had shared for 2 decades, wrapped in each other's arms, and Katherine felt the weight of the day settle into peaceful contentment. "Thank you," she whispered into the darkness. "For what?" Bennett asked, his breath warm against her hair. "For seeing me. For choosing me. For being exactly who you are." "Thank you for letting me love you," Bennett replied. "For trusting me with your heart. For building this life with me." They drifted to sleep like that. Two people who had found each other against all odds and created something beautiful from that chance meeting on a dusty Sacramento street. Outside, the ranch continued its quiet nighttime existence. Cattle settling in the fields, horses dozing in the barn, the land itself seeming to breathe with contentment. This was the legacy Katherine would leave behind. Not just a successful ranch or well-raised children, but proof that a woman could choose her own path, could refuse to settle, could build a life on her own terms and find love that honored rather than diminished her. She had been mocked for never marrying, called desperate and foolish and unnatural. But a cowboy had seen her truth, had recognized her wisdom, and together they had proven all the doubters wrong. In the years to come, their story would be told and retold, inspiring others to hold out for real love, for true partnership, for relationships built on equality and respect. Young women would point to Katherine and Bennett as proof that another way was possible. And somewhere in the future, in a world they could barely imagine, people would still be learning from their example, still finding courage in their choices, still believing that love could be a partnership rather than a surrender. But for now, in this moment, Katherine and Bennett Frost simply slept peacefully in each other's arms. Two people who had found exactly what they needed in each other, who had built a life worth living, who had loved and been loved completely. The Wild West was fading into history, but their love story would endure, a testament to the power of choosing wisely, of waiting for something real, of refusing to settle for anything less than a love that honored the whole truth of who you are. And in the morning, they would wake up together and face another day of challenges and joys, working side by side as they always had, partners in everything, bound by love and respect, and the unshakable conviction that they had found in each other exactly what they had been looking for all along.